This is Burn This Book, a banned books book club where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which was published in 2017.
Yay!
Yay! And Sabrina Carpenter was in the movie. Just to bring it full circle to, pop music, current.
Right, which is something we always try to do. This is a big hallmark of our podcast.
This is a big pop culture podcast.
Try to keep all of our books current and relatable in terms of the Billboard Top 40. So, thank you, Espresso. You're my espresso, Eden. This book is actually quite serious. We laugh. Okay, so the summary of the book.
Sorry.
But it was but what? But what, Eden?
But I think it was serious, but also showed some levity throughout it, like a teenager's life. Like she talked about SpongeBob and stuff like that.
100%.
Anyway, so that Sabrina
Angie
Carpenter
is
our SpongeBob.
That's what we've always said.
We're off to a great start. Yeah.
That's what we've always told people. Sabrina Carpenter might have to do with your guys' brat summer. Oh, no, sorry. But for us, she's our SpongeBob.
The summary.
Okay. So, and this summary was actually written by Angie Thomas. So we're going to use hers. Yeah, so amazing. The author of the book. All right, so 16-year-old Star Carter moves between two worlds. The poor neighborhood where she lives and the fancy suburban prep school she attends. The uneasy balance between these worlds is shattered when Star witnesses the fatal shooting of her childhood best friend, Khalil, at the hands of a police officer. Khalil was unarmed. Soon afterward, his death is a national headline. Some are calling him a thug, maybe even a drug dealer and a gangbanger. Protesters are taking to the streets in Khalil's name. Some cops and the local drug lord try to intimidate Star and her family. And what everyone wants to know is what really went down that night. And the only person alive who can answer that is Star. But what Star does or does not say could upend her community. It could also endanger her life. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun,
dun. Something I'm also going to note is I watched a few interviews of Angie Thomas's, who is just truly a delightful human being. I want to be her friend. But she shared that the thing she wants people the most to get out of this book is that empathy is more powerful than sympathy. And to understand why people say Black Lives Matter, it's not about saying Black Lives Matter, therefore nothing else matters. But for Angie Thomas, it's the idea that saying Black Lives Matter is about acknowledging that systemically our country hasn't valued Black lives. And this book does such a good job because it goes into that in the backdrop of Black Lives Matter, but also explaining how Black teenagers are adultified in our system, where they're treated like people that are over the age of 18 and they're tried in that same way. And also talks about code switching, talks about puberty and just being a teenager, talks about family dynamics, and just what life is like. It really brought home Black Lives Matter in the most beautiful way. 10 out of 10 for me. I loved it. Some of the books we talk about, I'm could do without. But this book, I loved it. I thought it was written so well. Oh my gosh.
I agree. It was
an
written
easy
so
read.
Well.
Yeah.
Easy read. I also think man, Star has really complicated relationships. And I feel like it's the most nuanced family that I've read in YA.
Yeah, same.
I feel YA is just typically very generalized and very stereotypical in many ways. But her dad used to be a gang member and her uncle is a police officer. She has a white boyfriend. She has a half brother whose mother is complicated. We'll say complicated.
Yeah.
They watch SpongeBob. She witnesses terrible things. She has to deal with going to a really nice, predominantly white school versus coming home to a not so great neighborhood. She's the intersection of a lot of identities.
Yeah. I thought like, so let's just use like her parents and like her family as like a case study to talk about this nuance.
Mm-hmm.
Like her parents alone, like they were high school sweethearts. Her half brother is a year older than her. So clearly her dad had cheated on her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they still like really embrace that brother. Like that is her brother. And the parents are like, there's like a redemption story with her dad and how he really turns his life around, but also like, yeah, you can tell that these parents like are choosing each other actively despite the mistakes that were made, and they're building a family that's like loving and cares for each other and is a safe place for themselves, you know? So that's like a nuanced situation that on the outside you'd be like, ooh, messy. But when you look at it, it's actually like the most stable relationship she has. It's the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's like ideal. Angie Thomas described how she wanted to write about a dad who's present, who's there, because they really only saw in shows like The Cosby Show or Good Times and stuff. But even then, it wasn't that real. And then The Cosby Show got tainted because of Bill Cosby being a predator.
Scandal noted.
Scandal noted. Scandal noted. So she wanted to tell the story of like a dad who's showing up and trying. And she did that so well. I mean, he's the one that like kind of teaches Star about the Black Panthers and about the Black Power movement and about Tupac and about hip hop music, which is where the name The Hate You Give comes from. The whole family dynamic is complicated. You don't get to know all the secrets about her parents' marriage, but you know that they're trying and that they are putting their family first in everything.
Yeah. I feel like, this was such a unique YA novel to me.
Yeah.
I did come across a really great quote though. Adriana Ramirez for the LA Times.
Okay.
Critics are calling The Hate You Give a Black Lives Matter novel, since the system that the young and plucky Star seeks to dismantle is the institutional oppression of Black people. The Hate You Give is, yes, a novel about race, but it is also a dystopian young adult novel that happens to be set in reality.
I love that.
So I guess I'm like contradicting myself. What I meant to say, the family dynamics feel different than any YA novel I've read, but it is very much still a YA novel and could be categorized along as a dystopian along with Hunger Games, Divergent, and all of that, because they are fighting, each of the main characters in those are fighting an oppressive society. And trying to make some change come from something.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was a cool article that we'll link in the show notes.
Love that. That's interesting. And thinking about the characters. So the characters that stand out are so like Star, her family, her siblings, and her parents. And then past that, you have like her relationship with the people that live in her neighborhood. So Khalil, her friend, her friends who live in that neighborhood. And then past that, you have the relationships she has with the people at that prep school she attends. And one is her boyfriend. I think his name's Chris. And he's a white kid. And then her best friend, who she's also white, and she uses a lot of gives a lot of gives microaggressions. What is the grammar there? She participates in microaggressions. She commits microaggressions. Yeah. There we go. Against Star a lot, and Star for the first half of the book, Star like kind of brushes them off, you know, in order to survive. That's a huge part of surviving these multiple universes you're living in. But she brushes them off, and then it just gets to be too much when the Black Lives Matter movement starts, and her best friend just doesn't get it and starts saying like truly racist things. Angie Thomas explained that a lot of those stories in the book stem from her lived experience going to a predominantly white school. And like she shares this one story of her being in a car and they were looking to get like coffee or like dessert or something. And they got to the bridge that separated both neighborhoods. And the people in the car were like, we can't go to that neighborhood because that's where all the criminals live. and Angie Thomas, that's her neighborhood that she grew up in. And she remembers being silent. And one of her quotes was, "Sometimes you just make yourself stay silent." And
Yeah.
I think that's what happens in the code switching. And Angie shares that like one of the coolest things about Star is that you see that Star doesn't stay silent. She starts speaking up. And you see that transformation happen. And it does kind of, Star's decision to stand up for herself transforms all of her relationships, but especially her like relationship with Sabrina Carpenter's character in the movie. I don't remember her name. I don't know why.
Haley.
Haley. I really suppressed that. But Haley like doesn't get it, and there's like a whole thing. Their relationship falls apart. It's really heartbreaking and sad. But also Haley at the end like sort of gets it, but it's past the point where Star's like, I genuinely don't need your friendship, but I'm happy for your journey. And so you also see Star like standing up for herself and not needing the validation of Haley. So you see like all this growth.
Yeah.
And also like Haley doesn't get to just, she's not entitled back to Star's friendship after all of that. And I feel like sometimes in stories, there's like that really nice moment where the white person does the nice thing and then they're best friends again.
They have another friend, Maya, who they hang out with, who is Chinese.
Yes.
Maya Yang.
Yes.
Who like also validates Star and says, yeah, Haley has said some weird stuff to me too.
Haley's always been pretty racist.
Sabrina.
Yeah. Sabrina. Sabby. That's what we call her here in this corner of the world. Sabby. Free. Yeah.
One thing, so I watched the movie before I read the book.
Oh, okay.
Because I thought I was too cool for YA novels, but I did watch the movie, you know.
Gosh,
one of those things where I think it started with Hunger Games though, like because I read Hunger Games and then watched the movie and thought this is the exact same as the book, so I'm just gonna watch the movie. Something I loved and that still I think about from the movie is when they go to the protest and Star gets the megaphone and starts to participate in the protest. Her boyfriend comes up to her and says, all right, what can I do to help you? Rather than, let me come with you, I'll march alongside with you. What she says to her boyfriend at that point is, go home and make sure my siblings are okay. There was something about that to me as like an ally. Sometimes like the most impactful thing I can do as an ally is to support from behind the scenes rather than support from behind the scenes to let the people whose voices need to be heard be the primary spotlight. Rather than, oh look, I'm a white boy participating in a Black Lives Matter movement because this is my girlfriend's cause or something like that. No, I'm at home with the kids so that my girlfriend could be out there and speak for her community, speak with her community.
Yeah. I love that. That's really poignant.
And I think like just like combating a lot of performative stuff too. Like sometimes it is just babysitting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's really true. I was impressed by the boyfriend, honestly. And it was interesting reading Star's, like, she felt conflicted a lot because of having this white boyfriend and inviting him into her space. And her space is very sacred. And we do this thing, especially in America. I actually think it's a global thing. I've been pondering it, where we criminalize poverty. So we will automatically say, because you do not have the house that's massive and 2 boats, there's something wrong with you. It is your fault, therefore you are without. It's like, I think it's rooted in prosperity gospel stuff, obviously, but we all need to disentangle this idea that being without is your fault. And there's an idea that like, yeah, you deserve it because you're criminal, because you're less than, because of that. And so even like the language of this neighborhood is not a good neighborhood versus this is a good neighborhood. I think that's something that like we should flag in ourselves is like, what are we saying about it is not a good neighborhood? I think we have to be specific because in every single neighborhood, there are families who are trying to like be happy, to be safe, and to be healthy, and just trying to live safe lives. And from what we also know, for Black people, certain wealthy white neighborhoods are not safe for them. Something like that really stuck out to me was that Star, as the 16-year-old, had the entire burden of the legal system on her of how to define what happened to Khalil. She was only 16. And I feel like that happens too often, where we treat Black youth as adults and force them to grow up. And I saw this thing about like Taylor Swift and like prominent white women. We infantilize them and we adultify Black women. I don't know what to do with that, but
yeah, it's a lot of needing to reflect on our own behaviors and thoughts. Man, this is such a good book, because I think like if I were to put this next to Hunger Games, you know, in terms of like YA novels that I would want my children to read, I'm trying to think. Granted, I will say that I read The Hate You Give. Well, one, I read The Hate You Give. Two, I read it more recently. But even comparing the movies in terms of like role models, they're like probably on par in terms of like needing to make hard choices. Katniss and Star.
Yeah.
But I think like having this book be rooted in reality shows a more tangible way, like shows you more tangibly how you can translate that courage in today's world rather than in, you know, a possibly communistic I don't even actually remember
whatever the world that Hunger Games is in. Whatever system. I mean, the stakes are just as high. And I think that's a devastating thing to realize, is the stakes are high. I mean, people are dying because of this oppressive system, and they are innocent Black men and women. And then you go a step further and you look even outside of our justice system and you see trans people are just being killed. Like, there's just so many, like, the stakes are just as high. And I think that is what's devastating, is it doesn't have to be in this like fantastical universe for it to be a really scary thing. But there's stuff we can do. There's stuff we can do. We can all work together to fix this stuff. It's not a lost cause.
I guess another connecting factor between the two YA novels is like Tupac. The Tupac lyrics are applicable in both Hunger Games and, well, actually most YA novels, because the young adults are the ones often being targeted in in the YA novels. But the quote is, "The hate you give little infants F's everyone." We're censoring that because
we don't know who's listening. We want to make sure teens are comfy.
We have teens on this show. Maybe.
Maybe.
Also, my parents listen.
Which I love, because my parents don't even listen. I'd kill for them. Just kidding. I'll kill for them to pay me attention. Yeah.
But what a poignant quote, which is like, the hate you give little infants F's everyone. How do we treat the youngest of our society? That feels like even a complicated topic to even bring up, because there's a lot of fighting for the unborn, but then what happens after they are born? How are we treating them then? When we fought for them to be born. But are we giving those in poverty the means to give those children a good life? Are we effing them up? Are we pulling over teenage kids, and when they reach for a hairbrush, are we shooting them? What are the are we giving them cell phones? Are we banning books?
Like giving them cell phones? No, but I know what you mean, though. Yeah. And are we banning books? Are we taking away opportunities for people to be kids? For kids to be kids.
For kids to be kids. And are we making sure their schools are safe environments, from like physically safe? Like What are we doing about gun safety? Yeah.
Everyone in every neighborhood, every family just wants their family to be safe and healthy. That's like, that is the honest truth. Some are aspiring for more, but that is the baseline. And if we treated every neighborhood with that expectation, that like, oh, we're all have the same desires here. We want our kids to be okay. We want our kids to be able to go to school without danger around the corner, walk to the schools, to the bus stop. We want buses to be able to pick up our kids so we can support them. Like, I feel like if we just went back down to the basics, I do think we would change how we look at neighborhoods. And like, one of the conversations I hear a lot about, like, gentrification, especially in my city in Denver, is like, oh, well, now this town is a lot better because of gentrification. That's not true at all. It's just different drugs. Like, that's the truth of the matter. Like, it's not safer or better. It's just different drugs are in there now, and more expensive.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more homelessness because people are being kicked out of their housing because they can't afford the rent hikes. Do you think you would feel differently about your current community if you had gone to a more like Asian Americans, like student body school situation?
I wonder if I would have moved by now.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
But because I am acquainted with and have known basically predominantly white communities my whole life, then it's just like, oh, it's just another.
This is just what it is.
This is what it is. But there are, like, the few times that I do visit California or like go back to New York.
Yeah.
I'm just like, wait a second.
Wait, hold up.
I mean, like, the first time not the first time I went to San Francisco. I'm trying to remember a time I went to San Francisco. It was just like all of a sudden I like saw how many Asian people were out there.
Yeah.
And then I feel like my life flashed before my eyes.
Whoa.
I was just like, whoa, like, what if, and then cue the tape rewinding sound.
Yeah.
What if my dad got a job in California instead of New York? And even like in New York, they chose to move to Connecticut because of the good schools there. So what if they like hopped over the border over to the New York side? What if I grew up there? Yeah. What if I grew up where most Asian people immigrate to when they come to the United States, which is California? Most likely, I would not have married a white man. I'm projecting and thinking,
Right, you did that.
Yeah, I did.
I get it. This isn't real life, right? We did that. Yeah.
Yeah, just, it feels like, did you watch that movie Past Lives?
Yes.
It feels almost like that, even though there was like it was more of like a identity thing rather than like a partner thing,
Yeah.
Of just like, oh, I've grown up with this identity. Yeah. I only know this identity. But what could have been if I had grown up in California? My mom, my older sister is 10 years older than me. And so when we first immigrated to the US in 1997, they took a trip to visit friends in Toronto. And both my mom and my older sister on the trip home cried. And they're like crying to my dad, like, why didn't we move to a place like Toronto where there are so many Asians? Why did we move to a place with so many white people? Like, there's just so much that we have to learn now. Like for my mother, just learning English.
No kidding.
Learning how to integrate and assimilate versus like, I have a lot of jealousy of Chinese kids who grew up in cities. I feel like they are more surrounded by language and culture. Yeah. But But that also could be the way my parents raised me too. You know, they might just be really inconsistent with holidays. Yeah, that's right. I'm talking to you, Mom and Dad. I just remember one year we did something for Chinese New Year, and the next year we did not. And, you know, we were just inconsistent in that way, too. You know?
I think it would be easier to be consistent, though, if you are in a community
That's
that
true.
is consistent. You know, like, for
Yeah.
me, even, like, this is not the same, and I totally know that. But, like, with my Italian family, like, we did a lot of Italian traditions when more of our family lived near us, and the ones who, like, really cared about upholding that stuff was involved. As people have moved away and, like, gotten married and, like, you know, family members have died and stuff like that, like, it is harder to keep up those traditions. Like, we are doing our best, but it's not the same. Like, we're not doing the big 7 fishes meal. We're not doing blah, 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 but, like,
Yeah.
I think I do think that it is like a work, and it is so much easier when you are doing it with a community where the structure is already there, and you guys are kind of like, it feels like from what you just said that you're kind of building it from scratch. The structure of culture that culture relies on.
Yeah. Well, we really only had ourselves.
Yeah. You're really building it from scratch.
Yeah. And so, like, even now, like, the one Chinese New Year tradition we do is, like, piggybacking on my brother-in-law's family traditions.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And so, like, now my Chinese New Year celebrations are just, like, going over to my sister's house because they've got all the things going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. It reminds me of that part in the book, and this might be a stretch, but I don't think it is, when Star's family moved, right? Yeah. But you can tell there's, like, this whole conflict with the parents and everything, but they have to do it to keep their daughter safe because of, like, the new gang stuff, and because the dad used to be affiliated with gangs. Like, they're just, it got too risky with everything, that it was the right thing for their family to do to keep the family together and safe. But you still see that conflict of, like, now the whole family has to participate in this code switching world. You no longer get that sacred space, and now the home has to be the sacred space and not, like, the neighborhood. And also you see her neighborhood was getting gentrified and was changing a lot, and people were fighting back against it. Like, those things that were safe and sacred were disappearing. And within this violence, so there's, like, a slow violence of, like, culture and having to move and all of that, and then there's also that, like, very fast and literal and capital violence where her friend is killed at the hand of a police officer. But, like, you kind of see all these, like, fissures, is that the word I'm looking, fractures happening in all parts of their family's life through this. It's not just like oh, that was sad that our friend died, but how it impacts every single corner of their life and how they now have to act in public. And I love how, Eden, I love how you were able to draw that experience with your experience, and how, like, I think there's a great lesson there. I think that's the empathy versus sympathy bit, because I think seeing ourselves in the book in whatever ways is what I think creates humanity, versus just being like, that must be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is such an important skill that books teach, is that empathy part. Yeah, and I feel like in everything just feels so binary in a lot of ways. But, like, we've had to read a lot of books with male characters as the protagonist.
100%.
And, like, we can still see ourselves, like you and Catcher in the Rye, right?
Right.
Me.
It's true, though.
Right.
It's honestly very true, though. Holden Caulfield, yes, I know. Yes.
Like, we've had to see ourselves in the shoes of male characters.
Yeah.
I mean, a beautiful example is, what's her name from The Outsiders, Essie Hinton. Like, she wrote a whole gang of boys that were really, and that was a work of empathy as well.
Yeah.
Like, she wanted to understand why the boys in her school were acting the way they were acting.
Yeah.
But I also think, like, we're seeing a problem, I feel like, with boys not reading books about girls.
So the way it's marketed, too, is like it's a girl book, whereas Harry Potter is just a book.
Yeah.
And if it's a book about a girl, yeah, it's a girl book.
Yeah. And I feel like we're doing boys a disservice by not letting them learn from female characters and all of that.
Yeah. I think you're so right. I think that girls, we've had to learn how to do that. It is a skill set that I think girls have learned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. We haven't given that opportunity to boys.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to learn later on, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something
or
interesting.
They never learn.
or they never learn.
Yeah.
But on that idea that in empathy versus sympathy, there's this prominent like thought process, and it's like it comes from like 18th century philosophers like David Hume, I believe. Let me tell you. Yeah, and Adam Smith, and there's other philosophers who are also on this idea that empathy is actually not as good as sympathy, because empathy argues that you must be able to understand or put your feet in someone else's shoes in order to care about them. Whereas sympathy is just the simple act of saying, I don't understand it, but I care because you are a person and that matters to me. Like, you matter to me inherently. Whereas other people, so it's like a really interesting conversation. But Angie Thomas, her whole thing is that empathy is more powerful than sympathy. But yeah, it does make me wonder, maybe that's just the higher level, is like, we should be able to love and care and be an ally. And even Roxane Gay has this talk where she talks about how allyship is stupid. You shouldn't just be on the sidelines being like, I support you. It's your fight too, because you're a person and this is your world and we're all community together. So you should be just as invested as the person who is being directly impacted. And so it's a really interesting thing when we're talking about this, but I do think that like the lower level, and I think the baseline level of even just like acknowledging like that Black Lives Matter, is that idea of empathy is more powerful than sympathy, because we still haven't gotten to the point where as a system, as like an institution, we still don't value Black lives as much as we value white elite lives. And then maybe someday we'll get to the point where we don't even have to know what it feels like to be in someone else's shoes, to just love them and to fight with them. Maybe that's like the higher law that we'll hopefully get to someday.
Yeah.
As a society, where it's like, I don't need to know what happened exactly. All that I know is that you are hurting and I am going to fight this with you. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but I do think about that.
Yeah, bringing it to our favorite gal, Toni Morrison.
Yes, go ahead.
I believe she said it in the commencement speech.
Okay.
The function of freedom is to free someone else.
Okay.
And I don't think you need, like, that one, like, just that by itself, like,
yeah,
you don't even need that empathy, right?
Yeah.
You just like, I am free to do this.
Yeah.
And my role as a contributing member of society is to help someone else do the same thing.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And even with that, I don't think that means you have to go into the white savior complex. I think there's nuance. I think it's that question of what can I do? And I think it's also that conversation of like caring deeply without the guilt and without the idea of like, people can't save themselves. No, it's saying like, this system is massive and impacts every single person. And we all need to put our unique skills together in order to overthrow it so everyone can be free.
Good caveat.
It's okay. Yeah. I don't have any other thoughts about this book other than it was like so easily, it felt like it was written, it felt like she wrote it like in one draft. Like, it was so well written, so clean and so clear. And I'm sure there were trillions of edits, but like, it felt like she just like, it just felt so effortless, and it was very effortless to read, and it was engrossing. All the characters were interesting. Honestly, it was so good. If you want to conceptualize Black Lives Matter better, if you are still struggling, I think it's a really great book.
Why do you think it was banned or challenged?
No idea. I think because people don't think Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, I think that's why it was banned.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah. I'm guessing the
There's
same thing.
also, like, I think Star and her boyfriend Chris were like going to have sex or something, and then Star was like,
yeah.
"I'm not ready," and maybe like glorifies gang members, according to some people, even though it definitely did not in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the police brutality. Well,
Oh, okay.
I guess the reason why it would be banned is probably the negative perception of police rather than the brutality part,
Yeah.
ironically.
Yeah.
And then probably drugs. Drugs
Yeah.
and gang violence.
I think you're right. I think drugs.
Yeah.
Just drugs. Yeah.
Just drugs.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. So, the reasons why. Let's see, challenges. Okay, it was one of the 10 most challenged books of 2017, 2018, 2020, and 2021.
That's wild.
Because it was considered pervasively vulgar. I did not find this vulgar.
What? Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious what parts they're talking about. Okay, go on. Yeah.
And yeah, what is the definition of vulgar, I guess?
Yeah, interesting.
It contains drug use, profanity, and offensive language, as well as sexual references, and was thought to promote an anti-police message. Which, I think that was another great thing that Angie Thomas did, the nuance of police, because Star's uncle is a police officer.
Yeah.
And he was her father figure early on in her life.
Yeah.
When her father was in prison for taking... So I think that was like another great nuance that she brought into. Because Carlos is like a second father to her. And and he respects his position as a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
He does not condone what 115 did. That's the badge number of the police officer. And like he's doing his own work of trying to dismantle the racism within his unit. So I don't think it's anti-police at all. I think it's anti
the system of oppression, systemic violence. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's see. Someone said the inclusion of the books was almost indoctrination of distrust of police. And they asserted that we've got to put a stop to that. I mean...
Yeah, it feels like the people who read it with a lot of defensiveness.
Yeah.
And projection.
Yeah, I would agree.
Which is always a fun way to read a book.
It is.
Just get riled. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. I believe we've read all of our reviews so far. Mm-hmm. So if you have not yet reviewed our podcast, please give us 5 stars and leave a review. Apparently that's what keeps us
going.
Yeah. If you have anything less than 4 stars, let us know.
Yeah, we'll fix things.
We are receptive to feedback.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Also, I want to do a plug real quick. Mm-hmm. The Apache Stronghold is an activist group, and they're going to the Supreme Court on the 11th to ask the Supreme Court to reconsider the Ninth Circuit's ruling that it was just and legal for the United States government to give Apache land to a mining company. The land in question is called Oak Flat, and it is like the most sacred land. And effectively, if this land is mined, Apache religion will be gone. It will be destroyed. There's no way, you can't practice it anymore. And all of the traditions that have lasted thousands of years will be gone. And so they're asking on September 11th for everyone of every faith tradition or non-tradition to join in prayer, because this is a spiritual matter for them. And so they are using spiritual tools to deal with this. So we invite anyone who wants to join in to just offer prayer and thoughts on September 11th, specifically for the Apache Nation. This would be an act of genocide on their nation in Arizona. Mm-hmm. So yeah, prayer. Pray on September 11th. And if you want to follow along their journey, go to ApacheStronghold.com.
We'll link that in the show notes.
In the show notes. But yeah, sorry, I'm doing some plugging, but that's something that really matters. If we lose that community, like, I don't know, it's talk about book banning.
Yeah.
You'd be banning the entire religious text that is found in the indigenous land there. So, okay, that's all.
That concludes season 2.
Yay!
So we'll be putting out details about our season 3 books, and we may be playing with just releasing one episode a month at that point, but we'll let you know. You'll be informed.
You'll be informed. You'll be super informed. Okay, love you all. Love you, Eden, especially.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.